young people. The two suspicious deaths, both arson attacks, I understand. One a man called Bullock Forsyth, who had information in relation to child abuse, and significant information. The second one, earlier, a couple of years earlier, a caretaker, where what was said at the time was that he had tapes relating to sex parties that were taking place that were connected in with this, and that one was handed to the police at the time and got nowhere. The Bullock Forsyth one went to the police at the time and got nowhere. What I want to see is both those suspicious deaths reinvestigated, because what links them together is both were people who, in essence, were blowing the whistle on child abuse for whatever motive, and two very suspicious deaths.
So, tell us more about these two suspicious deaths. How were they treated at the time, do you know, and why do they need to be looked at again now? Why were they not looked at sufficiently well previously?
Well, good question, and I don't know why they weren't looked at sufficient at the time. The Bullock Forsyth case has been well documented. He worked in the field of social care with children's homes. The evidence about what he was said to have uncovered is very precise and relates to what's come much more to light in the last 12 months and in the last 3 or 4 months in particular. His case is crystal clear. It's clear that his death was highly suspicious, that he had crucial information about child abuse, that the former death, again, it was said, he needs more investigations to find more details, but it was said at the time there was a caretaker in Lambeth where there was a very suspicious death from following a fire, and again it was said he was providing information and tapes relating to sex abuse and sex parties, and the information related to them has been given to Operation Trinity, and I'm hoping that more people, if they know things, will come forward, because it's an important part of the inquiry.
So you're saying that these two men, from what you can gather, they were, it would appear, allegedly murdered because of information that they had about sex parties involving young children?
I'm saying that they died in suspicious circumstances, and that's what should be investigated. And yes, in both cases, what links them is the information was that they had information and indeed evidence of child abuse, and therefore it becomes all the more important that those cases are fully reopened. And my fear is not that an unwillingness in the police to do it, because I've met the police, including on this issue several times. It's whether there's enough resource available to the police to be able to carry out investigations to deaths that took place quite some years ago, which obviously technically is quite difficult.
And you think that their deaths were related to a paedophile ring that was in some way related to Westminster?
Undoubtedly linked. From what I have seen and the information I've been given, undoubtedly linked to child abuse, and potentially linked into the wider scandal, and that's why it needs to be investigated. I mean, there are figures in authority who are linked in both cases, and therefore all the more important that they're fully investigated, and that means putting significant resource in. If we don't pay for the police to do the job and have enough police doing it, we will not get to the truth, and that's what I'm calling for. Enough police officers with enough specialism in there so that every stone is turned over to see what lies beneath it. There's certainly a lot there with these two cases.
Now, this file that you've handed over to the police contains the names of 13 former ministers, 22 names in all, amongst them 14 Conservatives. Some of them are still MPs, you say. Some of them are still in the House of Lords. What do you hope for, having handed over this file now? What sort of information is in that file?
Well, the police asked me. I'd compile the list of names. I've been assisting various police forces with specific pieces of information and evidence that have come to me. But I drew together a comprehensive list, talking to other campaigners on the issue, and Operation Trinity were very keen for me to go through that list, which I have done with them, outlining why these people could be of interest. And you know, these are allegations. They're not proven, and you know, whether all of them are guilty of anything, I don't know. But having seen the evidence there with some of the cases, without question, you know, there should be major investigations and huge resource put into them, because some of the evidence is quite dramatic and is very, very compelling indeed.
How have you managed to gain access to this information, and are you suggesting that police didn't have that access until you've provided them with the file? Well,
what concerns me, I mean, a lot of these people who I discussed with the police in that list are under active police investigation. I'm pleased to see that by different police forces. But what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of information in and around Westminster that hadn't come forward, and there's more still to come forward that people have. I've spoken to people in my inquiries who had important pieces of information and evidence that they didn't realise was evidence that hadn't been given to the police. And there are people with more information, I'm quite certain of it. And as well, there's former police officers, especially special branch officers, some of whom have contacted me, who do have significant information. And if the Official Secrets Act restrictions are lifted on them, will be willing, and far more willing, to come forward and divulge that information. I think some of that would be hugely significant in moving forward, and indeed in potentially prosecuting some of these cases.
Is that what you're asking for the Home Secretary to do?
It's the most vital thing that Theresa May needs to do. There are, to cite one email that came to me just last week from someone who was in Special Branch, which was, well, look, we and others have a lot to say, but we're restricted by the Official Secrets Act. I've heard that several times now with people with vital information, that the Official Secrets Act is holding them back. They've signed it. It would be a criminal offence to say anything. The restrictions of the Official Secrets Act in relation to historic child abuse need to be lifted by Theresa May, or by Parliament if that's what's required, in order that those people actually in reality feel compelled to come forward and share the information that they have. Because don't forget, Special Branch was keeping an eye particularly on senior MPs, and there's a lot of information there that is not available to those police officers investigating at the moment.
You appear, certainly, Mr Mann, from what you're telling us here on Sky News this afternoon, to have a smoking gun. Obviously, you're not going to do it on our programme today, but at any stage in the future, are you considering using parliamentary privilege to name those on this list?
No, I think it would be inappropriate for me, or indeed any other MP, to do that. And the reason is that the two critical things to me. The first is that the voice of the victims is heard. I've heard some harrowing tales of what people went through as children. Well, the victims have a right to be believed, and I think that's fundamental. But secondly, some of the alleged perpetrators are still alive. The last thing that's needed is me or any other MP getting up and using parliamentary privilege and potentially jeopardising a criminal trial that could lead to them being jailed. Okay. If these perpetrators, and the evidence is true, they should go to court, stand trial, and let a jury decide whether they're guilty or not, and if they are, let's have them in